RugbyRenegade.com, the #1 online strength and conditioning program for rugby. Are you ready to get bigger, stronger, fitter, and faster and dominate your opposition? Welcome to the Rugby Renegade Podcast, where we build machines.
Hello and welcome back to episode 61 of the Rugby Renegade Podcast. My name's Jamie Bain and today I interview Rich Hunwicks, who is Head of Performance with Catalan Dragons down in Perpignan in France. Rich, very experienced S&C coach with experience in rugby union, rugby league at club and international level and experience with EIS, and he's also a board member of the UKSCA. So he gives tons of really great insights about coaching and training and performance. So give it a listen and let us know what you think. Hi Rich, welcome to the Rugby Renegade Podcast. Great to have you on. Let's start by you just telling us a little bit about your background, how you got into strength and conditioning and some of the teams and sports you've worked in and with.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it, Jamie. And probably a brief summary of my S&C career. It wasn't a typical pathway. I left school as a very keen amateur rugby player with a bad ankle injury and decided to go and travel the world a little bit. Ended up working in the hospitality industry in Austria. I subsequently learnt German and coached snowboarding for quite a long period, which was actually great with an ankle like mine and a fixed boot, etc. That's where my love of coaching started. I was coaching in English, in German, and a little bit of Dutch, and decided that actually I wanted to get back to training athletes and teams, and be back in team sport, which is what I'd spent my school years playing, a lot of rugby union and league. So not to any great level I'd had there. So that spiraled me into my first qualifications and returning back to England, where I enrolled at university and started my undergrad degree at Leeds Beckett. I immediately started volunteering with amateur teams, individuals, as many things and opportunities I could get my hands on. Even back then, it's such a competitive industry. Getting involved with any team that I could, whilst training general population, to be fair. So I was personal training, I was doing general fitness, advice to everyone that I could assist and help to broaden my experience. It was at that point I was working in a private school and I was able to work with rugby union teams. I was lucky to tour with schoolboy teams, so I really started in junior development. I got an opportunity then with Leeds Rhinos and started my pathway in pro sport, working with junior level athletes. To snowball that on quite quickly, I got an opportunity to work with the EIS a couple of years after that, which I did, and that diversified my thinking massively. I met some great characters at the EIS, some quality practitioners that showed me a different perspective towards S&C and athlete preparation other than the team sport environment. So that was invaluable, really. I then went into more time. I went back to Leeds really in a full-time capacity. Was fortunate to drop onto a team that were highly motivated and highly successful, and rode a wave with them, picking up some trophies at that point, and was exposed to some quality individuals, which taught me a lot, both players and staff. I learnt a lot from them. And that then lent on to international jobs with Wales, which was my first one in 2011. And then I moved to Salford, which was a new franchise. And then on to, after 2 years, a permanent full-time role with England into the 2017 World Cup. I finished the role with England and the Rugby League as a head of performance with a World Cup final, and moved to Catalan through a connection, Catalan Dragons, through having worked with Steve McNamara, who was previously the England head coach. So I moved my family to France, and I've been here now in my third year in France as we speak today. So a whirlwind, really, in a nutshell. Yeah, there's my S&C pathway.
Yeah, and tons of experiences to draw on from in this chat now. Like, you're currently in France, and obviously everyone's in a similar-ish situation. But how has COVID-19 affected you guys with your season? And is there any news about what's going to happen moving forward or anything?
The season was really in its infancy after a really really good pre-season period. I felt this year we'd had a really good pre-season, my third one here, and it was probably the most productive. The COVID-19 has affected us significantly. The French have been very, very strict on the legislation. So we've had now 4 weeks out of training, which initially is, for most S&C guys, I would suggest that you like to be in control. We like to be in control of our program, our training loads, what guys are doing and what they're not doing, and certainly have a strong influence. It's become a period where you have to relax a little bit and understand that we're not going to have that influence. The scenario that we're in, all of my players, the Catalan players, are training at their homes. They've got a variety of equipment. They've got a variety of facilities, amenities, and I'd be very honest, they've had to be creative. So we've broken down the period. We're 4 weeks in. We had 2 weeks of general training, as I would call it, general preparation. We're now having a little bit more specific in a 2-week block, which has been a bit more detailed in feedback they've got, sessions they've been asked to do. And then we will, depending on what the French government allow us to do, we will then periodise according to what we can do, whether that's a mini pre-season before we go back into competition, or we were just discussing a couple of days ago, potentially saying to the players, look, just stand down and have a rest. But fortunately, the nature of the beast with our players is, and a lot of pro and even amateur guys out there that are training is your medicine, and training is what you like to do and what you base your routine around. So we feel we've got a lot of good guys on our bus at the moment, as I would call it, and they're keen to train. So I'm not going to take that away, and it's working with the individuals and working with the facilities and accessing what they can do, rather than worrying about what they can't do, I think, in this period. So at the moment it's fast and fluid, and I have to put a big amount of trust in them, but I have realised how much they do actually listen. And sometimes we feel that athletes maybe don't listen or don't respond or are spoon-fed, but credit to this group, and I'm sure there's a lot of guys out there, and you've seen it all across the web at the moment, people being creative and just training. Training's training. Get out there, do something, make a goal, make a target, stick to it, work to it, whatever that may be. Something is quite often better than nothing, as long as you're not going down a route that would get you injured, potentially, would be my view.
Yeah, definitely. Creativity is definitely the key there, and I'm sure, I'll know and you'll know those certain players who probably this is one of their best parts of their career. They're just able to train all the time. So definitely good points there. Now, you touched on obviously the kind of injury risk, and there's a few people coming around in the press and making statements about how we come back once the decision is, or lockdown's over, and the decision is what's happening with the season, where it's going to start. How do you think it's best to deal with that, looking at chronic acute loading and things like that? Yeah,
I don't think there's any sport, particularly rugby, with high collision rates, rugby union or rugby league, such a physical demanding competition that by rights you can just go, so flick the switch, tomorrow we're going to play, without suitable exposure to contact, running load, speed exposure, etc., of which there's a huge amount of research on. So we'd be fools, and the powers that be would be foolish not to take the advice of suitably qualified performance guys who, you need to prepare guys to play. Otherwise, the injury risk, as we all know, would be significant. So yes, you need to build up that chronic load, and if you go straight into a really acute dose of high collision, high contact, if you've played the game, if you've not played the game, whatever level, I remember going back to when I returned from travelling, and I had a couple of amateur games, and I remember how sore I was from playing Pennine Division 4 rugby union. You think, this is a top level. I've got 120 kilo guys running into each other and absolutely decimating themselves. How are we going to prepare them? Go back to basics, and we have to have a preparation period is probably my answer for that. However short or long it is, we don't know. And it, again, focus on what we can do within that period. Respond to the players' feedback, which is probably absolutely key. That we have an idea about loads, we have our our acute chronic loads, we have our databases coming in with all of our information, but I very much encourage people in this period, coaches or players, to look at it holistically as well as to what are your athletes saying, or if you are the athlete, you're the player, how are you feeling, and what is your body, how is your body responding to this? What is unique in rugby league to have a pre-season and a short in-season, and then an enforced stand down and potentially reignite the season. So it's a blank canvas and a new chapter in someone's book at the end of this journey, I would say.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how different teams kind of deal with the situation. And you've touched on something there. Obviously, like we've got the science and the data behind sort of principles we use, but then also big point you made was communicating with the players and figuring out in your environment how to do it. And I believe this is something you spoke about. I think it was the UKSCA conference, and had kind of good feedback about your talk there. And it's about kind of adapting your approach to fit your circumstances. Could you kind of elaborate on your approach to that?
Yeah, the talk at the UKSCA was based around two contrasting environments, and the two environments were the England Rugby League set up into the World Cup, which was pretty much unlimited budgets, the best players in the Super League competition and the NRL that could represent England, working with Ferraris, I would term it. Really, really high quality program was available due to lack of budget restraints, etc. Which, in contrast to that, I was talking about my first experience with the Dragons, where we had a certain caliber of player. Some were international level, some weren't. We had a certain amount of resources available, and the budgets just weren't as open to maybe the technologies or the activities that I wanted to pursue to develop performance. So adapting to suit the environment and chameleon coaching, as I termed it at the time, is vital. Is one program better than the other? No. What is the end point that we want to get to? Well, we want athletes to develop. We need athletes to be ready to play. We need players to perform, to win, give them the opportunity to win. So ultimately in performance sport, it is about win or loss. If it's amateur level rugby, yeah, you want to win and lose, but at junior level as well, it's probably more poignant to talk about development and asking how, as practitioners, we can develop younger players for long-term careers, which is what the role is at that level, and it should be, rather than the win outcome. So differentiating, quite simple strategy. What can we win? What can we win in our environment? So I'll give some examples specifically, and maybe that gets people thinking. Athlete monitoring, I've just done a huge project on that with Leeds Beckett Uni, and athlete monitoring can be ultimately very complex with a high-end £50,000 app-based system that gives you every metric under the sun, or it could be 5 modified questions on a daily basis in the changing room that all players can access, and they can grade on a simple scoring of 1 to 5. Simple or complex, all we actually really need from that process is a really clear outcome. But once we've got the outcome on a wellness questionnaire, it's not really what the outcome is, it's what we do with that information. So are we going to adjust our training based on a response of players saying they are very fatigued and they've slept very poorly? Yes, we probably should. If we ignore that on its simplistic level, we're probably naive, blasé, or just not doing what our job effectively by ignoring that information. Whether I got that through hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of technology, or I got that information through asking a player directly. So that example for me was to simplify it at Catalans, make it very easy to get the information, and then show the players that we were acting upon the information, so they built a level of trust with us. But that was that wellness as a simple example, and you could say the same across your strength programs, across your GPS, which a lot of guys in rugby are using quite avidly. But how effectively do we use the information we're given, and how in your environment, whether that's an amateur or how does it apply to your environment? Because often the Hollywood stuff doesn't actually give you much value. It's the simplistic basics that apply to your environment would work, and that would be different for everybody. So I hope that sums up that in a way that's understandable without talking too explicitly.
No, definitely, yeah, makes a lot of sense. There's no point gathering all that data or spending lots of money on gathering that data, especially and if you're not actually acting upon it and using it to develop your program. That's the whole point of it. So
probably add on to that, Jamie. We all talk about in our environments, either player or coach. It would be great to have. I would challenge every practitioner to ask the question, it would be nice to have, but what do we really need to have? What do we really need that's going to give us a performance benefit, that's going to prepare us to win or to play well or to make us injury resilient as such? What do we actually need? And when you break it down, what you actually need is not that much. If you look at it on a base level, it would be nice, of course, to have 22 racks with 160 kg per rack. It would be, but what we actually need is a barbell and some weight in a strength setting, for example, to put it really basically. So, and quite often in team sport, unless you've got unlimited budgets, that's key. What do we really need? What's going to give us a return in the program?
Yeah, definitely, and like you say, I guess you've learned that from having the experience of being in both camps, having unlimited budget, awesome players, access to loads of different technology, and then obviously being in another environment where you don't have all that, and you've got to work out what you need and what you can get the most out of in that environment. So it's definitely good points. Now, in your current environment at the Dragons, you've got, obviously not at the moment, but normally in your normal in-season, you've got a pretty tough fixture list in terms of travel, obviously travelling to the north of England every couple of weeks. What strategies have you used to kind of combat this and keep your players in good shape?
A unique role at the Dragons, like you say, travelling probably every 10 days in season. Not a huge journey, but on average it takes 10 hours in perspective, unless you're flying private, and the quickest we've ever done it is 6 hours. So 10-hour journey, yeah, has an impact. It's basically a working day, has a significant impact on the program. But what we did from the start was look for players and look for people to be involved in our program that accepted that's the animal. That's what we've got to do. So it's not, feel sorry for us. We understood what we signed up for. And so how do we deal with it? We have manoeuvred our strategy a little bit over the last 3 years. I thought I knew a lot about travel when I came off the World Cup, having city hopped weekly with the England program over an 8-week period. And then I'm now 3 years in, and having done a post-grad project based on this topic, feel like I understand a little bit more, but there's still a way to go. And everything that we do applies to our group, and every group is different. I say that quite a lot. So we've had to evolve with the group. To put it really simply, we started off with a policy of fly in early, prepare well by training in the UK the day before, and then playing the game and getting out quick. So in early, out quick. All the standard processes within that. Probably the key things to highlight were using compression when we travel, hydrating appropriately on the journey, using electrolyte supplements, etc., to maintain hydration status, which is often overlooked. Make sure that we didn't miss meals, and the nutrition that was available to you in the travel process was key. So whether you're traveling 5 hours on a coach or you're traveling 10 hours on a plane and a coach, you need to make sure that your nutrition and your energy intake is sufficient and appropriate all the way through that. There are no blips within it, because that 2 days or a day before a game, anyone who works in sports nutrition or in performance would tell you that that's a big no-no. Even at a basic level, if you're only fueling 2 days before the game really, really well, that's certainly a big help than missing meals, etc. So there's this window of opportunity to provide quality nutrition where we used external suppliers, guaranteed our meals at certain times, even if that meant taking the meal onto the plane and eating in transit rather than ordering. Travel food is, everyone goes to airports and you staring you in the face and there's a baguette or there's a sandwich or it's not ideal for our guys to prepare that way. So we provide the food. We then get to the UK and mobilise, recover, massage, etc., train the day before the game as we normally would, and then prepare accordingly. Our view, having a group of family-orientated players, and their feedback was that they wanted to get back to their families quickly. So quite often in the last 2 years, we'd be taking the first possible flight out of the UK back to France. That in itself led to huge problems in terms of our sleep deprivation. So we're finishing games at 11 o'clock at night, having kicked off at 8. You'd be back at the hotel at 11, looking to leave the hotel at 4 a.m. for a 6:30 flight so we could be back in France at midday. If you put a game on top of sleep deprivation, on top of dehydration, on top of probably a little bit of alcohol intake because we allowed the boys to have a drink and relax. We'd been away usually for 3 days at that point. The sum total was actually a really high level of residual fatigue, so that we're coming home almost feeling travel fatigue magnified into what, even for the guys who hadn't touched alcohol, into a hangover type feel. And we thought we could win that back through the week, and that wives and families and the guys would be happy. But it really turned out we're looking at it the other way now. So we flipped things round. We're travelling quite late. We do all of our training, as much as our training as we can in France, and then we stay late. So we arrive late and depart late, and we focus on 8 to 10 hours of quality sleep after the game. We focus on eating appropriately the day after the game, rehydrating appropriately, and coming back well rested. And that actually, if you imagine it as a bucket, which is one of my guys turned this to me, I thought it was a great analogy, is, we've got the bucket, it's constantly leaking energy, leaking water, but if we're taking less out of the top, we've got less of a problem. And we've focused on that end phase of what we call our prep cycle being really, really good, so that we're ready to play, but we're also ready to train again in our next training week, in our next cycle.
No, thanks for sharing that. You could have just kind of said what your approach is now, but I like how you kind of showed how that's developed over time, and you've looked at what you were doing and how you could adjust that to get better results. That's really interesting. Now, this is a question we ask all our guests on the podcast, and it's what do you think is the biggest mistake rugby players make when it comes to strength and conditioning?
In terms of youth development, young players, I would say that not paying enough interest in developing the fundamentals, get strong, become competent in really good movement patterns, get good advice or get advice, and then work on those as a youth player, even through 17, 18, 19, 20. Front rowers in Super League typically don't mature until 24, 25, so you can still be working on really good quality strength training. That in turn would make the individual, in my view, more resilient, and we're playing a tough sport. The guys are very, very, very tough and exposed to huge collisions, as I've said, so being strong is key. And not neglecting mobility and soft tissue work at any level. That's from the start of your career to the end of your career. The most experienced guys I've worked with who are in the best physical condition are the guys who spend the time doing their joint mobility, doing the stuff that's not glamorous. It's not what people see, and it's not the Hollywood stuff, but it's getting yourself in a position, excuse the pun there, to play and to perform and enjoy playing consistently. Come round to that word then, be consistent. Whatever you're doing, do it religiously well. Don't just do it once and then come back to it 2 months later. Do it again. Master the basics, get really good at that stuff, and the rest will follow. Some of the top players I've been lucky enough, and top coaches that I've worked with, have instilled that, and the basics done well is absolutely key. If you're no good at clean and jerk, get really good at deadlift, because just need the first pull and the deadlift to affect your rugby performance in some way. Don't worry about what you can't do. That's probably it. People trying to do too much too soon, and then you end up injured, or your performance maybe isn't as good as you hoped. And be patient. If I was talking through an S&C coach's lens, the biggest mistake I see, and I think, is people taking jobs because they want a job rather than taking the right job. If that makes sense. There are lots of people wanting to get on the S&C pathway on the ladder, but I would challenge younger or any practitioner to say, don't just take a job for the sake of it. Look at whether it will benefit you. Does it suit your style, your skill set, how you want to develop as a coach? And B, it takes a brave guy to turn down a job, or a brave practitioner. Sorry, shouldn't be selecting just the males there, because there's some top quality female S&Cs out there as well. So take the stuff that you feel you can develop in, you can offer quality to, rather than making a mistake of ending up in a role that probably isn't for you for the sake of taking a role.
Yeah, definitely good advice for both players and coaches there. Now, moving on, this is something we had a few questions about recently, and it's aerobic training is kind of often looked down, or at the moment tends to be looked down, and like high intensity interval training is proposed as better. Now, where do you see the place for aerobic training is, and how do you train it with your guys?
Okay. The fitness world, in my view, there's some great research out there. There's some good stuff coming out from loads of quality guys. But I think a lot of the basics, the fundamentals, it's one big cycle. And we're seeing things coming now that we used 15 to 20 years ago. And they'll keep things that we do now will be used again in 10 to 15 years. There's not a lot of really, really new stuff out there. I had a laugh with an international coach who came to watch a session, and he said, "I can't believe you're running coat hangers. That's old school. You guys are all the new school." And I said, "Nah, it is old school. It has been around for a while, but it works." So going to the aerobic conditioning, where it fits in everyone's program will be unique, but for us in the Dragons, we use in our general prep phase, in our first 3 to 4 weeks of our 8 to 10 week pre-season, certainly focus on aerobic conditioning, using some linear running, using some different forms of running drills that have been around for a long time. Do we only use that? No, we use a suitable dose and a suitable plan within our training week that gives us the exposure we need, but we are certainly not training aerobically for aerobic sake. And then you come into certain types of player and certain positions and individuals that may need aerobic work but prefer to do it in a different modality, for example on the bike or in some other way, shape or form. And I would challenge practitioners and athletes to work with what suits them and what suits their group and the player. There's experienced guys out there who will really respond as players at amateur level or pro level to being given work that suits their style or their preference. There's nothing worse than athletes not buying in, and then is the response, I don't have an answer to this, but is the response as effective, particularly when you come to aerobic preparation, which can be quite mundane in by nature, that where does that fit? Well, it probably fits in a suitable dose for certain individuals within team sports, and maybe potentially the group at times as well.
Yeah, very, very good answer. Obviously, I mean, the classic answer for all these kind of questions is it depends, isn't it, on the player, on the team, and the environment. I guess an example from kind of following your trail of thought is if you've got an older player who, he's had 15 pre-seasons in his legs and has a bit of a tendinopathy history, you perhaps put him on a bike rather than running him. That's a kind of classic example of how you adapt based on your players. Is that the type of thing you mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, groups within groups. There's not really a one size fits all. Although, having said that, it's really easy to get dragged into trying to differentiate for absolutely everyone. And if you're team, you're working with a schoolboy team, trying to differentiate. I'll use strength as well as an example, and I'll use strength and conditioning. Let's use the two broad terms. If you were differentiating for 25 schoolboy rugby players on a strength program and differentiating for 25 schoolboy rugby players on a general preparation aerobic conditioning plan, and you are one coach, I would ask you, how the hell are you doing that? Good luck. It just doesn't happen. And you guarantee by the time you'd written strength program 1 for player 1, by the time you got to strength program 25, you would still be reverting back to, if it was a lower strength program, you'd be looking at basics of squatting, deadlifting. It's not, and derivatives of those two. If you're looking at running programs, you'd be looking at potentially MAS derivatives, versions of that. And then how do you actually deliver that in a team sport? When you work with individuals, completely different conversation, because you're working one-to-one. But if you're working with a group, you have to be prepared to go compromise and say, this model would work, it will give us some effect, it will give us a training response, and therefore it is applicable to my group. It may break down further. Rugby union and rugby league have positional differences which are significant. So for example, rugby union, it might be front 5 or even front row and back 5, and in terms of lock and back row, running different programs, different distance, different durations, and that might get a little bit more technical. And then the back line certainly different again. We have the same in rugby league, with our hookers and halfbacks being our high mileage guys and our fullback, and then our middle guys having a very different demand, who are doing a lot more tackling and short distance running. But if you start getting too complicated and too Hollywood Jeff, you'll get lost in it and end up giving nothing, rather than going, what is my target? What's my outcome? If it's general aerobic preparation, how am I going to get it? How am I going to apply that effectively as one coach with a group or an individual? Be really, really clear on that. And if you get lost in it, go back to that reference point. How am I going to apply this from my group? One of my simple examples, we go back to what you just asked, Jamie, and said on that, is I've got 3 or 4 gaps in the pre-season period. Senior players would do one of the aerobic sessions a week off feet on an alternative bit of kit. Simple as that. It would marry up in RPE, it would marry up in duration, but they would take the load off their running so that it didn't expose them unnecessarily to injury risk through overrunning in their particular case.
Yeah, excellent stuff. Now, this next question, we kind of touched on it earlier in terms of how to come back after, once the season gets back up and running. It's in training there is a need to kind of replicate game intensity, but it comes with its own injury risks. So how do you go about balancing that risk and reward in training?
Minimum dose response, first answer. So what we need and not more than we need. We're quite stringent on, I try and guide the coaches quite stringently on not just doing contact training for training's sake. We have a really clear outcome of what we need to do, because contact's pivotal at the right time in our program. And the speed that we train at is essential to replicate game demands. So we look quite closely at, as a lot of programs do, the drills that we do, our core drills, what they elicit in terms of demand positionally, and then how we need to apply those in terms of time that we train for. By doing that and having a plan for training, which is quite detailed, and then evolving that plan as we're coaching, we find that to be reasonably effective. You can never say it's perfect, it's never foolproof, and what I will not get is too hung up on numbers. Sometimes within a session, if we're training opposed, we're looking at a game speed session, we're training against our reserve grade at the Dragons, and we feel we want to go for 5 more minutes than our original plan. That is the art of coaching, and going, we're going to go here because we feel we can get some value, some high quality work. But what we would then do is reflect on that after the session and say, where do we need to now move in the our training load to accommodate that fluid nature of actually coaching. You can't sit by the numbers, and it's not a decisive way of doing it. In my opinion, you have to coach what's in front of you. So, if I was to put it in simplistic terms, for planning your training week as a coach or as a player, we would look to do our contact session 2 to 3 days after the game, so when the players were most recovered, but at least 2 to 3 days before the next game, so that we were maximising what we got from that session but minimising risk. So most recovered and an opportunity to recover again within that period. Within pre-season, slightly different. You can change that frequency. And we also categorise how we look at our contact work and our speed work. Is it linear speed? Is it multi-directional? Is it attack wrestle, defensive wrestle? Is it contact, or is it technical work within a contact situation? So there's a number of different categories. And guys out there doing, again, breaking that down in a lot of detail that is really useful. But go to basics, keep it simple would be my advice.
Yeah, I think I'd go back to the start of your answers. It's kind of all plans are written in pencil, and they need to be adaptable. And you've got to kind of give the coach times when they can, if they feel they need to do more, then you've kind of got to let them at times, haven't you? You can't rule with an iron fist with your watch saying that's the time. It's the kind of balance in the art and science of it, isn't it? And like say, if you give maybe a few minutes here and there to the art, then you have to take a bit later on, and that's fine. And coaches are usually pretty open to that. If you've it's give and take, isn't it? They'll allow that if you've given them a bit of leeway earlier on.
Absolutely. I just feel on this, you have to know what your end point is. Where do you want to be at the end of a training period, or a week, or a day? And then how you get there. The journey's never really linear, whether it's one session or it's a week or it's a month. It will always change. So a reference maybe UKSCA, which is I think we're going to talk about a bit further on. But I remember doing my UKSCA case study, and you required to provide an annual periodised plan on an A4 sheet of paper. And the annual A4 periodised plan that you present in a job interview or at something like that is really as good as the day it was written on. Because the next morning, when 4 of you guys have got upset stomachs and aren't able to train, the first bit of your plan's changed. Therefore, the domino effect is that full annual plan, you've shifted your strength program by a week already. You've shifted your running loads by a day already. It's just, in the realities of sport, whether it's amateur or professional, it's fast and fluid. If you're playing at an amateur level and you have to stay late at work and you miss your gym session, your periodized planning has changed. So don't get too hung up on, it's there in black and white, therefore we have to do it. It's there in black and white, but how do you, the phrase I've used a lot over the years is, how do you win it back? If you have to change, you have to adjust, you have to move because of some contraindicator coming into your program, something changing it, well, how do you win that back and get yourself back in a position to be ready to play, whether that's short or long term, and perform and try and win?
Yeah, definitely great answer. And you mentioned the UKSCA, and that's my next question, as I know you're on the board of the UKSCA, and what can we expect to see from them as an organisation in the future?
The UKSCA, being led at the moment by Chris Bishop as chair, has got, in my opinion, a fairly young, I include myself in that, young and dynamic board. There's been some brilliant work done prior to my arrival on the board. I've been on the board for 3 years now. This will be coming into my 4th and probably potentially the end of my term as the director. But the most recent work with the UKSCA has been to try and formalise the pathway for strength and conditioning coaches through their journey, the journey that a lot of us have took over the last 15 to 20 years. The UKSCA, for me personally, provided a reference point early in my career. I understand that it's not for everybody, but I do feel that I now endorse the UKSCA avidly because the quality of the organisation, in my undoubtable, and the resources that are coming out now and that are being shared are all there to benefit S&C practitioners. So the pathway that I've just talked about really work closely with SIMSPA to try and formalize the professionalism of the industry, and create some more industry standards and get some more recognition for our industry. There's 4 tiers within that. I'm going to try and go through this reasonably quickly. There's an S&C coach, S&C trainer, which sits at the first level, which previously was the foundation. Then an accredited S&C chartered member, and then a chartered fellow. So the chartered status gives more recognition to the profession. It's not a hierarchy as such to say I am better, or this because I sit at this level I am better than you. I think what most S&C guys would find is that, as we've got now, if someone knocks on my door or drops me an email and says, could you help me, or could you tell me about, or could we discuss? Absolutely, an open door policy. There's no hierarchy as such in my view. There are guys who've been in the industry over a long period of time which really warrant being able to have an opinion, in my view, and that those guys probably sit higher end of the pathway, and then there's the younger end of the pathway, or the more general end of the pathway. I would say there's a lot of PE teachers out there. I know I'm friends with quite a few who have an avid interest now, the way schoolboy and schoolgirl sport is going, that strength and conditioning in general population is more and more prevalent from a health perspective as well. So opening up some formal support for guys at that level who are maybe PE teacher qualified, but want some foundation in S&C training, that's where the S&C training comes in. So this formal pathway that gives people a reference point, that's exciting. Put that all together, and how that's evolving with Chris and the rest of the board's work with the resources available on the website. The UKSCIQ has all of the presentations from the conferences over the years. Some brilliant speakers at the UKSCA conferences, that I've seen in the last couple of years. And the fact that you can access that material, particularly it's become prevalent right now during this COVID-19, that what normally is an industry where you struggle to get CPD because you're working, you're delivering, you're coaching, or you're playing and you're working and you're trying to keep yourself ticking along, it's now a time to get access to that stuff. And the organisation is doing a huge amount in terms of trying to make that access available, open up, connect people in the industry. So for me, there are no negatives, and I believe Chris Bishop, as a chair, would say the same as myself here, is that we're really open to feedback. There is a, date-wise, we're now on the 10th of April today. There's a board Q&A. If you follow UKCA on social media, then you get all the information there on Twitter or Instagram, etc. There's plenty of information flowing. So keep in touch with the organisation. If you want to be involved, get involved. And certainly I think employers value that now. It's quite well valued. That, and as an employer, I would look to someone who's maybe gone through that process, not unequivocally, but I would certainly hold them in high esteem that they persevered to go through the accreditation, get themselves onto that chartered member status, etc. Because that is it's a coaching journey in itself, and developing as a practitioner over that. We're all doing that anyway, as I am week to week, trying to learn more about what I can do in my program to improve our performance. So.
Yeah, cool. And on that note, talking about the pathway and the journey as a coach, what advice would you give to an upcoming strength coach?
Be patient. I've mentioned not taking jobs for the sake of taking jobs. Be enthusiastic. Be humble. Open yourself up to as many opportunities as you can, and offer yourself based on your skill set. It's probably key to get a blank piece of paper or a diary and write down, maybe, in my view, 3 things that you feel you're good at as an S&C coach, and 3 things that you maybe think you're not. And everyone will have strengths and weaknesses. Identify those, work on the weaknesses, play to your strengths, and don't try and be all things to all men. Some great coaches that I've worked with and took influence from, one of them Neil Taylor, who anyone in Welsh weightlifting will know. Neil time. I think he must be about 80 now. If he ever hears this, he'll shoot me. But Neil said to me early on, I asked him about sprint training, a current rugby union international, and we were working with this kid at 15. He's currently playing in the England setup. And I said, what about sprint training, Neil? What are you going to do with him on that? And we were S&C together with him. Neil was influencing the program from an England perspective at the time. And he said, you know what? I know nothing really about, I would never qualify myself to talk about sprinting. I'm a really, really confident Olympic lifting coach, strength coach. That's what I'm going to focus on. We'll go and find someone that can deliver that speed component and that technical ability. And the message was, look, don't try and be all things to all men, which is absolutely critical. We're often asked in our sport settings can you give me some advice on nutrition? Well, look, I'm not a nutritionist. I've done some study in that area, but that's not, so hand that over. Be prepared to say as an individual, that's not my area. Therefore, point someone in that direction to someone that is. And that takes a brave practitioner. And when you're in a young end of your career, that's tough, because you want to work, you want to appear to know, in my opinion, what you're saying and be valued. But I guarantee the players that you work with will value you highly through the skills that you are very strong at, rather than trying to be average at everything. Try and focus on your strengths. So hopefully that's enough advice from a reasonably well experienced.
That's great advice. And any books or resources you'd recommend? Obviously you mentioned the UKCA resources.
I'm normally in day-to-day practice, I get very little time to read, but having just spent the last 3 years doing a postgrad project, I've spent more time reading research papers than I probably ever did in the 5 to 7 years prior, when I was just coaching, and that's been eye-opening for me. In terms of resources, I think reading around other things is essential. If your life revolves around just strength and just conditioning and just rugby or just football, I think you can become really polarized about what you're looking at. So broadening your mind, reading alternative texts. I personally have been reading a lot of stuff in business. My favorite book in the last 2 years has been Shoe Dog, the book around Phil Knight and the formation of Nike. You know, it just opened my eyes. It's something that I felt and I identified that I wasn't that comfortable when I spent time with the rugby league. I was managing big budgets and looking at things through a different lens with the England program, as opposed to coaching warm-ups, preparation, mobility, etc., speed. And I thought, I have to get better at this side. So reading stuff from a business perspective, for me, for example, being Shoe Dog, or really, really open my mind. And it gets you away from your normal thinking. And a term that was used by a former director of mine was to get in my helicopter. And that analogy is just getting up above it all sometimes, whether that's through your training, through reading, through looking at something different, speaking to someone different. It might be someone who's a really, really high-profile business leader, if you can get some of the time or whatever. Just opening your mind. And then probably my second, going back to actual literature, one of my favourite books, I think this is around our network, is Bravo 20, which is the story of the SAS in Iraq. And the challenges that they went through. My underlying appreciation on that text is just how far you can push the body, how far we can actually push our bodies, and we're in physical performance. What you think you can do and what you can actually do when you're exposed to something. Quite often we need to be strategic in how we're exposing people at this level, but your mind is really, really important in coping with physical challenges. So that for me is a great example and an easy read. If you've not read it, That's probably from 1980 something, so 86 maybe as a guess. So that's a reasonably old tech. So they're my few, and I'm saying probably broaden your mind as much as you can with as many things as you can. There's no no's. There's never doing anything wrong. But sit, reflect, review. How can you add value to a program or your personal practice through that?
Yeah, definitely. A lot of the guests on the podcast have sort of echoed the same. Look at any different area, even if it's completely unrelated. You'll find things that you can carry over to your own practice or the way you do things. So yeah, business is a common one, and like economics, and then maybe things that are related to physical development but in different fields, because we often get pigeonholed into our what's kind of popular for S&C coaches to read. So definitely look outside the box. That's great advice. So lastly, because I know we're cutting short on time now, Rich, but where can people learn more about you?
Good question. I'm not a huge social media man. This was the end of the last podcast I did. I use Bookface, as I call it, for my private and family, and humouring my wife, and the odd family photo and happy anniversary and all that jazz. I'm on Twitter and I'm on the gram. I'm not an avid user. I'd prefer to pick up a phone, do a FaceTime, have a chat. My biog's on the UKSCA website. Anybody wants to make contact, chat travel, chat rugby, chat S&C, yeah, cool, absolutely, get in contact. But I'm as keen to chat with other people and learn from them as I would if anyone would be with me. So how to learn more about me? Yeah, if you want to get in contact, by all means do. I'm not the quickest at responding due to I try and balance life a little bit out of work and give my kids the time they deserve, and probably important to have those values as well as being a family man away from rugby. But I hope everyone's found that engaging. I think my Twitter it's at Rich Hunwicks. If you can spell it right first go, then you deserve a PhD. W's in the middle and the S's at the end. And then I think on Instagram, similar. I couldn't even tell you. You see, I'm that far out of touch, but I'm showing my age here. You see, I'm showing me.
No,
we'll guys of course use it, and it's great. Some great resources there. But again, if I was saying to any young practitioner, go out, speak to people, engage with people. You don't learn anything from someone. You can say whatever you want on a social media post. It means nothing. Look someone in the eye, engage, get a feel for the way they respond. And obviously, this is an audio podcast. I've actually been doing it in my swimming trunks because it's 38 degrees in France. But that's some, just for you don't know exactly what you're dealing with until you engage with someone, face to face. So use that, do that, and hopefully people have found this of some value.
Yeah, I'm sure they have. Awesome stuff. Thank you. And we'll of course share links so they don't have to worry about spelling Hunwicks, and they can get in touch with you via that. And of course, recommend they do. Rich, thanks so much for your time. I guess now would be the time to let you get out and enjoy that sun with the family. But thanks very much and all the best.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So some great information from Rich there. Thank you for sharing the time with us and your information. So some great information there. Thank you, Rich, for sharing that with us. Some real good insights. Specifically, I thought about the way you're dealing with recovery around travel and everything you put in place there. Some great insights, and how you deal with aerobic training. And I think the big out. So there you go, some great information. Rich, thank you very much for sharing that with us. Really interesting about how you've dealt with the travel demands of working with Catalan Dragons in Super League and having to travel that much, and also how you deal with aerobic training, how you deal with, I guess, all adapting to all the situations and players. That's the big take home from me of adapting to your environment. So tons of great information. Really appreciate that. So guys, please subscribe to us on SoundCloud, Stitcher, iTunes, TuneIn, whatever you use for podcasts, and of course give us a 5-star review, and keep checking us out on the social media channels and of course rugbyrenegade.com. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to the Rugby Renegade Podcast. For more quality rugby strength and conditioning information, check us out at rugbyrenegade.com. Rugby Renegade, building machines.